This morning we're picking up in the book of Mark, the Gospel of Mark, chapter 1. And I know in your bulletins it says verse 21 to 39, but we're going to go ahead and go to the end of the chapter today. So Mark chapter 1, starting in verse 21 through the end of the chapter. So we talked about how John the Baptist came preparing the way and how we are invited to prepare the way for God to work in our lives. We looked at last week at Jesus calling the first disciples, and that when he called them, Mark says they dropped everything immediately, abandoned it all, everything they knew, everything they held dear, and followed him, chose to become his disciples, the ones who, when it was all said and done, they would look like him and talk like him and act like him and pray like him and eat like him and sleep like him and minister like him. Well, this morning, Mark gives us some stories about what it looked like to follow Jesus. What was going on in those days when the disciples said yes and as they began to follow him. So let's look at Mark chapter 1, starting in verse 21. They went to Capernaum, and when the Sabbath came, Jesus went into the synagogue and began to teach. The people were amazed at his teaching because he taught them as one who had authority, not as teachers of the law. Just then, a man in their synagogue who was possessed by an evil spirit cried out, "What do you want with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." "Be quiet," Jesus said sternly. "Come out of him." The evil spirit shook the man violently and came out with a shriek. The people were all so amazed that they asked each other, "What is this? A new teaching and with authority. He even gives orders to evil spirits and they obey him." News about him spread quickly over the whole region of Galilee. As soon as he left the synagogue, they went with James and John to the home of Simon and Andrew. Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they told Jesus about her. So he went to her, took her hand, and helped her up. The fever left her, and she began to wait on them. That evening after sunset, the people brought to Jesus all the sick and demon-possessed. The whole town gathered at the door, and Jesus healed many who had various diseases. He also drove out many demons, but he would not let the demons speak because they knew who he was. Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went away to a solitary place where he prayed. Simon and his companions went to look for him, and when they found him, they exclaimed, "Everyone is looking for you." Jesus replied, "Let's go somewhere else, to the nearby villages, so that I can preach there also. That's why I have come." So he traveled through Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and driving out demons. A man with leprosy came to him and begged him on his knees, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." Filled with compassion, Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. "I am willing," he said, "be clean." Immediately the leprosy left him and he was cured. Jesus sent him away at once with a strong warning. "See to it that you don't tell this to anyone, but go and show yourself to the priest and offer the sacrifice that Moses commanded for your cleansing as a testimony to them." Instead, he went out and began to talk freely, spreading the news. As a result, Jesus could no longer enter a town openly, but stayed outside in lonely places. Yet the people still came to him from everywhere. As I was reading this passage, the thing that stuck out to me the most were these two exclamations by the people at that synagogue in Capernaum, where they said, "Look at this man. He has authority. He has authority. He's teaching with authority. He's commanding evil spirits. Look at him. He has authority." Now, I don't know about you, but sometimes when I think about authority, it's not in such glowing terms. When I think about the way that authority is used, the way that we see authority used today, and generally the way we see power and authority used in the world, it's not always a positive picture. It's not always a positive image. But here we have Jesus who is using authority in a different way. We see Jesus who is using his authority in a different way from the way that we're used to seeing authority in the world. When I think about people who have power and authority and control, how do they use that power and authority and control in the world? Most often, they use it for who? For themselves, right? They use it for themselves. They say, I have this power and authority and control, and you're going to do what I say because that's the way I want it to be. When I think about when we look at the world around us, we look at people who have political power and political control. They don't always make the decisions that are best for people. They make decisions that are best for themselves. They make decisions, and this is not just talking about people who have power and control right now. I'm talking about in general, right? People legislatures pass bills, they pass laws that will help them get elected the next time they run for office. They don't always pass laws that are good for the people. They pass laws that are popular with those who put money in their treasury, who support their cause, who support them as they run for re-election. It's a self-serving game. When I think about people who have power and authority and control outside of the political sphere, people who have power and authority and control because they have a lot of money, I don't see a lot of those people using their money. Now, sometimes they will do good things for others. I'm not saying they don't ever do anything good, but most of that money stays where? In their bank account, right? In their investment portfolio, building more money than they could spend in a lifetime, more money than their children's children's children could spend in their lifetimes if they never made another cent. And where does that money go? Who does it serve? It serves them. When I think about people who have influence and popularity, they're famous and they've made a name for themselves, a lot of times the things that they do are just to build their brand, right? They're just to get more attention. They're just to boost the likes that they get on their page. They're just doing things for themselves. That doesn't mean that we never see examples of people using their fame or their money or their political power to do good. There are people who do that, but in general, those who have power and authority and control in the world's systems, they use it for themselves. It even happens in the church, right? I've seen it happen in the church. It even happens among those who claim to follow a homeless Jewish rabbi, and yet they're interested more in building their own empire than they are in following Jesus. But what does Jesus do with his authority? What does he do with his authority? Each one of these little stories that Mark tells us in the rest of this chapter 1 of Mark's gospel, they tell us that Jesus used his authority to serve others. He used his authority not to build his brand, not to build his fame. In fact, what did he say? Don't tell anybody. Shh, don't tell anybody what happened. He doesn't do it for himself. He uses his power and authority to serve others. So let's look at these stories one by one and see what Jesus did and how he used his authority in each one of these stories. In this first one, he's in Capernaum and they go to the synagogue on the Sabbath, because that's what you do, right? You go to the synagogue on the Sabbath. And he began to teach, and the people were amazed at his teaching. Now, he could have done his teaching, wrapped it all up, said, see ya, left on a high note, and marched out of town. But he doesn't. He finishes his teaching, and someone says to him, what do you want with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God. And Jesus recognizes that the man who is talking to him is afflicted. He's afflicted. The man who is talking to him is suffering. Mark says he has an evil spirit, and Jesus says to the man, "Be quiet." And he says to the evil spirit, "Come out of him. Come out of him." It's not very popular for us these days to talk about demon possession in the church. At least here in America. We're not comfortable with that. Maybe this man had a spirit. I don't know. Maybe he had a mental illness. I don't know. What I do know is that Jesus didn't ignore him. He didn't shut him down. He did something about it. He used the authority that he had to set this man free. And it happened in such a way that the people, again, were so amazed at what had just happened. They were so amazed at what had just happened. And news about him spread. Not because he was trying to build a brand, but because when things that are extraordinary happen, we talk about them. If you don't believe that, just get on Twitter sometime. People are always talking about the amazing, extraordinary things that are happening. You can find out about world events faster on Twitter than you can through the news stations, because people talk about the extraordinary things that are happening to them. It's one of the ways that people are striking back against sort of efforts in some places to control what the media puts out. People will just tweet it. The word gets out anyways. So Jesus left the synagogue, and they all went with James and John to the house of Simon and Andrew, and Simon's mother-in-law was sick. So first we had a man who was afflicted. Okay? And you could say that Jesus was doing a public service by helping this man who was afflicted. But now they're in a private home. Now they're in a private home. And not only is she a woman, but she's a woman who's not doing her job according to culture at that time. Many rabbis would have gotten up and gone to somebody else's house where somebody could take care of them. Because to be a rabbi was a high place. It was a high place in their social spectrum, in their social ladder. This was somebody that got served. This is not somebody who served. This is somebody, when they came, you put out the best food, you put out the best dishes, red carpet treatment. And he came into this private home, and here was this woman who society said had a job to do, and she wasn't doing it. Here was this woman who was sick. Probably she had something contagious. And Jesus goes in, and what does he do? What does he do? Does he stand up by the door and go, "Be healed"? Just, stay back there, keep your germs to yourself, be healed. No, he goes to her. He goes to her, and he takes her by the hand, and he helps her up. Jesus did not fit the bill of a rabbi that was there to be served. He came, and when he knew that she was sick, he served her. He served her. Now, a lot has been made of the last part of that verse. The fever left her, and she began to wait on them. But you have to understand that she was proving her worth in that moment. Jesus didn't heal her so she could make him a sandwich. That wasn't the point. Jesus healed her, and she, because she was grateful, and she, because these were the skills she had to offer, began to serve Jesus with what she had. Okay, with what she had. That evening after sunset, the word had spread. The word had spread, and people began to bring to Jesus the sick and the demon-possessed, and the whole town gathered at the door. And Jesus said, "I got to go to bed early, guys. Sorry. I've got a full speaking schedule. I've got some healings to do, other places." No. The sun has set. It's getting late. And it's set on the Sabbath. These people have waited until the end of the Sabbath so that they could walk the extra distance to get to Jesus, and so that Jesus could heal these people without violating Sabbath rules. They came to him, and the sun had set, and Jesus stayed up for them. Jesus healed people who had various diseases. He drove out demons, but he wouldn't let the demons speak because they knew who he was. So after staying up half the night, very early in the morning while it was still dark, Jesus got up and left the house and went to a solitary place where he prayed. He got his rest in, but he got his refreshment from his time spent in prayer, his time spent communing with the Father. Simon and his companions went to look for Jesus, and when they found him, they exclaimed, "Hey, Jesus, everybody's looking for you." If you're popular and you have an audience, where's your number one obligation? To your audience. But Jesus wasn't interested in building an audience. Jesus had a job to do. Jesus had a mission to complete. And so Jesus said, we need to go somewhere else. We need to continue in the nearby villages so that I can preach there also, because that's why I've come. Jesus used his authority to stay true to his mission. He said, we're going to move on. And so he did. He traveled throughout Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and driving out demons. And then we have this other story that Mark puts in here. This story about a man with leprosy. All right, so we've got a demon-possessed man. We've got, according to their ritual uncleanness, this was a big deal, right? So you've got a demon-possessed man. You've got a woman who's sick in bed. You've got people coming late at night, bringing all kinds of sicknesses and demon possessions. But here is this man who has leprosy. And I don't know if you know much about the culture at that time. Leprosy, it's not just what we think of as leprosy today, but it's a whole class of skin diseases that they considered to be contagious. And so whenever someone had one of those diseases, they had to be completely separated from the community. Completely separated from the community. In fact, if they were moving somewhere and they saw someone in the distance, they would have to say, "Unclean, unclean," to give a warning that they were a leper. So we've got Jesus who's ministering to these people who are kind of on the fringes, but now we get to somebody who is way beyond what people would consider to be untouchable. Not just untouchable, but don't even breathe the air around them. Completely cut off, completely outcast from society. He comes to Jesus, and this is kind of sketchy on the part of the leprous man. He comes to Jesus, and he kneels before him, and I can only imagine the fear in his heart as he approaches this rabbi that he has heard heals people and begs him. It says he fell on his knees and begged him, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." He knows all the rules he's breaking just by being in the same space with this rabbi, but it's his only hope. It's his only chance. And so he comes and he begs and he kneels, and Jesus is what? Disgusted. Ew. No? Angry because this man was breaking the rules. No? It says he was filled with compassion. And in the Greek, that word is splanknitsomai, and it means his guts were twisted inside of him. Have you ever had one of those experiences where you come across somebody and you are moved with such compassion that your guts are twisted inside of you, and you think, if there was something I could do. Here's Jesus. He is moved with that kind of compassion for this man, and he can do something. What does he do? Takes 6 steps back and goes, "Be healed." No, he touched him. He touched him. Like, this is beyond outrageous. Beyond outrageous. We have heard these stories our whole lives. We've heard them enough. They're just words on a page. But when we understand the context in which this was happening, that Jesus reached out and touched this man with leprosy, Jesus took that man's uncleanness on himself. He reached out and touched this man with leprosy, and he said, I am willing. And he said, be clean. And immediately the man was cured. Immediately. Jesus sent him away at once with a strong warning. Don't tell anybody, okay? Don't tell anybody. Go show yourself to the priest, offer the sacrifices that Moses commanded for your cleansing as a testimony to them, but don't tell anybody. Could you keep that kind of news to yourself? I don't think I could do it. I think I would be this leprous man. I'd be like, Jesus healed me. He couldn't keep it to himself. He spoke freely. Probably he was like, can't do it. Can't do it. And he told everybody, and everybody saw him, and everybody saw that he was clean, and everybody who knew he was sick before now saw him walking around cured. Cured. And as a result, Jesus could no longer enter a town openly because he'd be mobbed by people coming and saying, heal me. And so he stayed out in the solitary places, and yet people still came. When we look at Jesus and we look at the way that he used his authority, the power that he had, he used it to heal the sick. He used it to liberate the oppressed. He used it to touch the untouchable. He used it to stay true to his mission. When we think about the way that power and authority are used today, and we look at Jesus, what a sharp contrast. What a sharp contrast. Jesus said, you know the rulers of the nations lord it over each other. You know that, you see it. It's just the truth. It was true then and it's true now. But it should not be so among you. It should not be so among you. And we know that Paul said that we are to serve one another in love. You and I, we have power and authority and privilege in the world. If we don't think we do, we need to take a bigger look at the world around us. We may not be billionaires. You got $1 billion for me? No. We may not be billionaires. We may not have the most power and authority and control, but comparatively in the world, if you've got a roof over your head, if you've got food in your cabinets, if you know where your next 3 meals are coming from, if you drive a car, you are in the top 90s of percentile of the world in population. You and I have power and authority and privilege in the world. And you and I are called to use our power and authority and privilege in this world just like Jesus. So when we look at our position in society, when we look at our position in our families, our relationships, in our culture, in our world, how do we use the power and authority that we have? Are we using it for ourselves? Are we using it to add to our own fame, our own net worth? Are we using it to build more power for ourselves? Or are we modeling our practices after Jesus? Are we using the power and authority we have to reach out to those who are afflicted, to reach out and touch the ones who are sick, to reach out and to put an arm around and draw in those who feel far away, those who've been excluded, those on the fringes? Are we modeling our practice after the world? Or are we following Jesus? I'm going to leave you with that question, because I can answer it for myself, but I can't answer it for you. And I don't want to give you my answer because it's not as shiny as it should be. I suspect for most of us, it's not as shiny as it should be. I want to leave you with that question, and I hope that you will ponder it. I hope that you will consider it and give it some thought this week. How am I using the power and authority and privilege that I have in the world? Am I following the world's systems, or am I following Jesus and ushering in the kingdom of God?